The screen in front of you is glowing. Your eyes are burning. Your chest feels uncomfortably tight, and your mind is a relentless, chaotic machine, churning out thoughts about emails you didn't send, conversations you messed up, and the overwhelming, crushing weight of tomorrow. You clicked on this audio because you are desperate for sleep. You wanted something gentle. You wanted a soft voice to whisper meaningless comforts until you drifted off. But I am going to ask you to do something that is going to feel incredibly frustrating right now. I want you to open your eyes in the dark. Look at the ceiling. Listen to the absolute silence of your room. And then imagine that silence being ripped apart by the deafening, bone-rattling roar of a 3-ton predator that has just caught your scent.
Wait, what? No, stop! What are you doing? I'm literally having a panic attack here. My heart is pounding in my throat, and my anxiety is already through the roof. The title of this video said, "Relaxing Facts to Fall Asleep To." Why are you talking about predators and roaring? This is incredibly frustrating. I just want to shut my brain off.
I know you're frustrated, and I know your heart is racing. That sudden spike in your chest, that tightness, that instinct that makes you want to bolt out of bed or freeze in terror. That is exactly why you can't sleep. You see, the anxiety that is keeping you awake tonight isn't a modern disease. It is an ancient, hardwired survival mechanism. Your brain is reacting to a missed deadline the exact same way it was built to react to a saber-toothed cat stalking you through the tall grass. You are carrying the heavy, paranoid machinery of the Stone Age inside a modern world that never turns off its lights. And the only way to truly shut that machinery down, the only way to convince your primitive brain that it is finally safe to rest, is to face the very era that forged you. So take a deep breath, hold it, and let it go. We are going to travel back to a time before history even had a name. We are going back to the Stone Age.
I guess that makes sense. It's terrifying to think about. A world with no walls, no police, no hospitals, no lights. Just endless, brutal wilderness. How did we not just get wiped out completely? It feels like we were just weak, naked apes, waiting to be eaten.
That is the greatest misconception of human history, and unlearning it is where your relaxation begins. The Stone Age covers a span of time so immense that it is almost impossible for the modern human mind to process. 2.5 million years. Let that sink in. Every empire you have ever read about, every king, every war, every written word, the pyramids, the moon landing, the smartphone in your hand, all of it is just a tiny, insignificant flicker at the very tail end of our existence. For tens of thousands of lifetimes, generation after generation, humanity's entire universe consisted of nothing but stone, wood fire, and bone. And we were not weak. We were not mindless brutes huddled in caves waiting for the end. We were the most ingenious, dangerous, and adaptable engineers this planet had ever seen.
Engineers. But they just banged rocks together. That's why it's called the Stone Age, right? It sounds primitive. It sounds like they just survived by sheer dumb luck.
If you tried to survive by sheer dumb luck in the Pleistocene epoch, you would be dead before the sun went down. The term Stone Age is actually a massive injustice to the brilliant minds of our ancestors. Yes, they used rock, but survival demanded a level of creativity and an understanding of physics that rivals modern engineering. Imagine the mental focus required to look at a raw, shapeless chunk of flint and see a weapon inside it. This wasn't random banging. This was a deep, intuitive science. To shape stone into a sharp, reliable tool, early humans had to understand how energy travels through solid matter. They learned to strike the stone at precisely the right angle with exactly the right amount of force, using tools made of antler or hardwood to control the fracture. This process, called flintknapping, relied on the natural geometry of conchoidal fracture, the exact same physics that makes glass shatter in beautiful, sweeping, curved ripples.
So they actually knew exactly how the rock was going to break before they even hit it. That requires a lot of forward thinking.
Exactly. A skilled napper could look at a single core of obsidian or flint and systematically peel off dozens of razor-sharp blades. Just imagine watching them by the light of a flickering fire. The steady hypnotic rhythm of bone striking stone. Clack, clack, clack. Every strike calculated, every flake falling away to reveal something sharper, something deadlier. And they didn't just stop at function. About 2 million years ago, a tool emerged that changed everything. The Acheulean hand axe. These weren't just sharp rocks. They were symmetrical, perfectly balanced, shaped into flawless teardrops or ovals. The edges were flaked with such obsessive precision that they crossed the line from a mere tool into a work of art.
Why would they care if it was pretty? If you're starving and freezing, who has time to make a tool look like a piece of art?
That is the beautiful mystery of our bloodline. Making a perfectly symmetrical hand axe required foresight and patience. Some of these axes were made so large or crafted so finely that they were entirely impractical for cutting meat or scraping hides. They were symbols. They were ancient humans saying, "I have skill, I have status, I have an identity." It shows us that even in the deepest, most terrifying depths of our past, humans cared about design, about form, about beauty. They were looking at a harsh, chaotic world and forcing order upon it. But stone was just the foundation. They used bone to carve delicate needles, antler to make sturdy picks, and twisted plant fibers into cord and rope with meticulous care. They pressed bark shells and reeds into service. And as you lie there feeling the soft cotton of your sheets, I want you to realize that the resourcefulness of those ancient people is the only reason you are alive to feel it. You are the descendant of the ultimate survivors. And knowing that, feeling the weight of 2 million years of triumph in your DNA, means that whatever modern problem is keeping you awake tonight is nothing you cannot handle. You are safe now. Let the rhythm of the striking stone guide you deeper. Let the firelight push the shadows away. Our journey into the ice and the stone has only just begun. Close your eyes and let the modern world fade away entirely. Imagine the air growing colder, crisper, carrying the scent of pine needles, crushed earth, and the metallic tang of an incoming snowstorm. You are standing in the heart of the Pleistocene, surrounded by an ancient, untamed wilderness. If you listen closely, you can hear a rhythmic, percussive sound echoing through the dense trees. It is a sharp, deliberate cracking noise. This is the symphony of stone and blood, the heartbeat of human innovation. For generations, we have been told a lie about the people who lived here. We have been taught to picture the Neanderthals and our early ancestors as hunched, grunting brutes, dragging clubs and surviving merely because they were too stubborn to die. I want you to completely erase that cartoonish image from your mind right now. The people of the Stone Age were master engineers. They were observers of nature, chemists, and ballistics experts, operating with a level of environmental awareness that would put any modern survivalist to shame. Think about the absolute genius required to look at the natural world and see not just what is there, but what could be. The Acheulean hand axe we talked about earlier was just the beginning. As the millennia rolled on, the minds of our ancestors grew sharper, and so did their ambitions. They realized that a piece of stone, no matter how perfectly shaped, was still just a rock if you had to hold it in your bare hand. It limited your striking power. It transferred the shock of the blow directly into your wrist and arm. To take down the massive, thick-skinned beasts of the Ice Age, they needed something more. They needed to combine materials. They needed to invent the composite tool. And this is where the Neanderthals, often unfairly dismissed by history as slow-witted, truly shined as technological pioneers. Imagine a Neanderthal hunter sitting by a fire. He has a razor-sharp stone point meticulously knapped from flint. He has a straight, sturdy wooden shaft carved from a sapling. But how does he attach them? Tying them with animal sinew isn't enough. The sheer force of a thrust into a charging bison would shatter the binding or snap the wood. He needed something that could absorb the shock, something that could bond wood and stone with the strength of modern industrial epoxy. He needed glue. Long before chemistry labs, long before written formulas, the Neanderthals invented the world's first synthetic adhesive. They didn't just find sticky tree sap and smear it on. They manufactured birch bark tar. To understand how astonishing this is, you have to know how birch tar is made. You cannot just melt birch bark over an open flame. If you do, it will simply catch fire and turn into useless ash. To extract the tar, you have to heat the bark to over 600 degrees Fahrenheit in a completely oxygen-free environment. It is a process called dry distillation. How did a Neanderthal, living hundreds of thousands of years ago, figure this out? We believe they carefully rolled birch bark, buried it deep under a tightly packed mound of earth and ashes, and built a massive, roaring fire perfectly positioned on top of it. They controlled the temperature and the oxygen flow entirely by instinct, memory, and an intimate understanding of thermodynamics. Hours later, they would dig into the cooling ashes to reveal a thick, black, incredibly sticky resin. With this pitch, they secured their stone points into the wooden shafts, wrapping them tightly with plant fibers or animal sinew, while the tar was still hot. As it cooled, the tar hardened into a rock-solid, shock-absorbing bond. This was a quiet, invisible revolution. A simple spear was now a deadly, high-velocity weapon. It changed the balance of power on the ancient steppes. Humans were no longer just scavenging or hoping for a lucky strike. They were engineering their weapons for maximum lethality. They were designing tools that allowed them to strike from a distance, to pierce the thick hides of woolly rhinos and giant deer. Every single composite tool required planning, experimentation, and cooperation. The stone knapper, the wood carver, the fire keeper, the tar maker, they all had to work in perfect harmony. So as you lay in the comfort of your bed, wrapped in warmth, let go of the idea that our ancestors were primitive. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the complexities of your job or the stress of modern technology, remember the bloodline you belong to. Your brain is the exact same brain that figured out how to extract chemical adhesives from tree bark using nothing but dirt and fire. You come from a lineage of problem solvers who looked at a hostile, frozen world and decided they were not going to be victims of it. They were going to master it. They took the raw, unforgiving elements of the earth, stone, wood, fire, and bark, and orchestrated them into a symphony of survival. The rhythm of that ancient napping stone is still echoing in your pulse. It is a steady, reassuring beat. It tells you that you are built to endure. You are built to adapt. And right now, you are built to rest. As the glaciers expanded and the world grew colder, a profound shift began to happen in the minds of our ancestors. Survival was no longer just about avoiding the jaws of a predator or finding enough meat to make it through the winter. The Stone Age was evolving, and with it, the human soul was waking up. I want you to picture the inside of a massive, echoing cave. The wind is howling mercilessly outside, driving a blinding sheet of snow across the tundra. But inside, it is warm. The fire casts long, dancing shadows against the rough stone walls. And in this flickering light, people are doing something extraordinary. They are not sharpening spears. They are not butchering meat. They are creating something purely for the sake of beauty. They are reaching beyond the immediate, desperate need to stay alive, and they are seeking meaning. We often associate the Stone Age with animal pelts and rough furs. But archaeologists have found imprints in clay dating back tens of thousands of years that prove our ancestors were weavers. Long before the first fields of cotton or flax were ever planted, human hands were expertly twisting plant fibers, animal hair, and sinew into long, durable threads. Imagine the incredible dexterity and patience required to sit by the firelight, carefully braiding and knotting these threads into complex nets, bags, and mats. Weaving was one of the first great repetitive tasks, a meditative rhythm of the hands that passed from generation to generation. It was an innovation that changed everything. Nets allowed them to catch fish by the dozens, while woven baskets meant they could carry vast amounts of gathered food across long distances. But it was also the beginning of textiles, the quiet birth of the very fabrics that are currently keeping you warm. But the human desire to create didn't stop at practical things like baskets and nets. They wanted to wear their identities. They wanted to capture the power of the wild and drape it around their necks. Deep in a cave in present-day Croatia, researchers found something that completely changed our understanding of ancient minds. A set of eagle talons, meticulously polished, notched, and strung together to form a necklace. These talons are well over 40,000 years old. I want you to think about what it takes to get an eagle talon. Eagles are the apex predators of the sky. They are fast, aggressive, and incredibly dangerous. Catching one was a feat of immense bravery and skill. Wearing its claws wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a profound psychological declaration. It was a hunter saying, "I carry the spirit of the sky. I possess the strength of the eagle." These early ornaments are the first known signs that humans sought to display who they were, to externalize their inner lives and their spiritual beliefs. And then, out of that deep ancient need for expression, came the most haunting and beautiful invention of all: music. Let your breathing slow down and try to imagine a sound that has not been heard on this earth for over 30,000 years. In the hollow wing bone of a large bird, a bone that is naturally light and empty, a Stone Age craftsman used a sharp piece of flint to carefully drill precise, spaced holes. They didn't just guess the placement. They understood acoustics. They knew exactly where to carve the holes to produce different pitches. When a replica of this ancient flute is played today, the sound it makes is absolutely mesmerizing. It is a clear, ethereal, almost ghostly melody. Imagine being in that dark, cavernous space. Outside, the ice is conquering the world. The nights are overwhelmingly long, and the darkness is filled with the terrifying roars of cave lions and the heavy footsteps of mammoths. But inside the cave, someone raises that fragile piece of bird bone to their lips and blows. A delicate, beautiful note cuts through the silence. It echoes off the limestone walls, filling the massive chamber with music. For the first time in the history of the planet, the darkness wasn't just filled with the sounds of fear or the howling wind. It was filled with a song. The people sitting around that fire likely closed their eyes and listened, just as you are listening now. They felt the same emotional resonance, the same soothing comfort that music brings to us today. These acts, twisting fibers, polishing talons, carving flutes, they are the fragments of ancient souls left behind in the dirt for us to find. They prove that even in the harshest, most unforgiving environment imaginable, humanity's default state is not just to survive, but to create. We are dreamers, we are artists, we are musicians. The urge to make something beautiful is as hardwired into your DNA as the urge to breathe. As you lie there, let the imaginary notes of that ancient bone flute wash over you. Let it remind you that no matter how cold or dark the world outside your window might seem, there is always a space for warmth, for art, and for peace. The ancestors found their peace in the flickering shadows of the cave. You can find yours right here, right now, as you drift closer and closer to sleep.
I'm actually starting to picture it. The flute, the cave, the snow outside. It is oddly comforting. But, wait, you mentioned the darkness and the long nights. I just had this sudden, awful thought. What happened when the fire went out? Because no matter how beautiful that flute music is, the idea of being trapped in a pitch-black cave, knowing there are 3-ton predators roaming around outside in the freezing cold, it's suffocating. Just the thought of that kind of total, absolute darkness makes my chest tight again. How did they actually sleep? Weren't they just constantly terrified of the night?
That is a very real, very raw fear you are tapping into, and you are absolutely right to feel it. Before we mastered fire, the night was a tyrant. When the sun dipped below the horizon, our earliest ancestors had no choice but to scramble into trees or hide deep in rock crevices, praying they wouldn't be smelled or seen by the monsters that ruled the dark. The night was a time of absolute vulnerability, a terrifying void where human eyesight was useless, and the sharp senses of predators reigned supreme. For millions of years, fear of the dark was the most logical emotion a human could have. It is exactly why, even today, your brain sometimes struggles to let go when the lights turn off. You are fighting millions of years of evolutionary programming that says darkness equals danger. But that all changed with a single miraculous spark. The mastery of fire was not just a technological discovery. It was the ultimate rebellion against the night. We don't know exactly when or how it first happened. Perhaps a brave individual approached the smoldering aftermath of a lightning strike, overcoming their primal terror to carry a burning branch back to their group. But eventually, we learned not just to capture fire, but to create it. And I want you to visualize that exact moment. Picture a woman sitting in the dirt, rubbing a hardwood drill into a softer piece of cedar. Her palms are blistering. Her muscles burn with exhaustion. But she doesn't stop. She spins the stick faster, faster, until a tiny wisp of smoke curls up from the friction point. She drops a handful of dry, crushed moss onto the glowing ember. She leans in, blowing softly, steadily feeding it oxygen. The ember glows cherry red, spreading, eating the moss, until suddenly, whoosh, a flame is born in her hands. In that single instant, The entire hierarchy of the food chain flipped. Fire was a weapon that no claw or fang could defeat. When a cave lion approached the camp, the humans didn't cower in the shadows anymore. They stood up, grabbed a burning branch, and thrust it into the darkness, watching the golden reflection of the flames in the terrified eyes of the beast as it backed away. Fire was a shield. It pushed the shadows back. It created a safe, illuminated circle in the middle of a hostile universe. And inside that circle of light, everything changed. The hearth became the first true center of human community. It was the place where people gathered to share food, to warm their frozen hands, and to look into each other's faces. The fire extended the day, allowing them to sit up talking, sharing knowledge, and building the very foundations of language and society.
So the fire didn't just keep them warm. It literally gave them the safety they needed to actually relax, to sleep without keeping one eye open.
Exactly. Fire gave them the peace of mind that you are looking for right now. But its power went far beyond just light and safety. Fire was the first true catalyst for human engineering. They quickly realized that fire didn't just consume, it transformed. Early hunters took long, straight wooden shafts and carefully held the sharpened tips over the hot embers. They constantly rotated the wood, allowing the heat to draw out the moisture and carbonize the exterior. This process, called fire hardening, turned a simple piece of wood into a spear point that was tough enough to pierce the thick hide of a charging horse. Long before they attached stone tips, humans were using fire to engineer deadlier, more reliable weapons. They were taking the raw elements of nature and bending them to their will. And perhaps the most comforting transformation of all happened with food. We usually think of bread as an invention of the agricultural revolution, something that came along with settled farming. But archaeologists excavating a site in the Black Desert of Jordan found something that rewrote history. Deep in the ashes of an ancient stone hearth, they found the charred remains of flatbread. This bread was baked over 14,000 years ago, thousands of years before the first fields of wheat were ever planted. Our ancestors were gathering wild grains by hand, painstakingly crushing them into fine flour with heavy stones, mixing the flour with water and baking it on scorching hot rocks pulled straight from the fire. Just imagine the smell of it. The rich, earthy aroma of wild grains toasting on a hot stone, filling the cold evening air. Imagine a family sitting around that glowing hearth, tearing off pieces of warm, fresh flatbread, passing it to one another as the snow fell outside. It is an image of profound comfort and safety. The mastery of fire meant that the night was no longer something to be feared. It was something to be shared. The darkness outside the cave didn't matter anymore, because inside there was warmth, there was food, and there was light. So as you lie there, let the anxiety of the modern night melt away. You don't need to fear the dark, because your ancestors already conquered it for you. Picture that ancient, glowing hearth in your mind. Feel its warmth radiating against your skin. Let the comforting smell of wood smoke and baking bread guide you down into a deep, unbroken sleep. You are safe in the circle of light. Rest now. The fire we spoke of, that glowing hearth that pushed back the endless night, was not just a tool for warmth. As our ancestors stared into those flames, they realized something profound. Fire was a living thing. It ate, it breathed, it grew, and if it wasn't respected, it destroyed. But if you could tame it, you didn't just control your campsite, you controlled the entire world. I want you to imagine a vast, sweeping grassland, thick with overgrown dry brush, that has choked out the fresh shoots. The animals have moved on, and the hunting is poor. A modern human might look at this dead landscape and despair, packing up camp to wander aimlessly in search of greener pastures. But our Stone Age ancestors did not just wander. They were not passive victims of their environment. They were the original architects of the earth. Picture a band of hunters stepping out into the dry savanna just as the wind begins to shift. They carry torches of tightly bound, resin-soaked pine branches, the tips blazing bright orange in the twilight. With deliberate, calculated movements, they touch the fire to the dry grass in a massive, sweeping arc. They are not starting a wildfire. They are practicing fire stick farming, a highly engineered system of controlled burns. They stand back and watch as the flames devour the dead vegetation, clearing away the choking brush and turning it into nutrient-rich ash. When the rains finally come, that charred earth will explode with vibrant green, tender shoots, and that fresh grass will draw massive herds of bison, deer, and wild horses right to their doorstep. They were literally terraforming the planet, designing their own ecosystems to guarantee their survival. When you think of a Stone Age human holding a torch, do not think of a frightened ape hiding in a cave. Think of a master ecologist reshaping the world. And it was by the light of these very fires that one of the most beautiful and transformative chapters of human history began. As the humans sat around their hearths, roasting meat, the scent drifted far out into the freezing darkness. Out there in the shadows were the apex predators of the Ice Age. But one of those predators did not roar, and it did not attack. It watched. Picture a wolf, its fur thick and silver, its amber eyes reflecting the distant glow of the human fire. For thousands of years, humans and wolves had been bitter rivals, competing for the exact same prey in the exact same frozen valleys. But on one quiet, unforgettable night, a profound shift occurred. Perhaps the wolf was young, hungry, and cast out from its pack. Perhaps a human, feeling a strange sense of kinship with this exhausted creature, tossed a scrap of charred meat beyond the circle of light. That single piece of meat was the beginning of the greatest cross-species alliance in the history of the planet. Over generations, the wolves that were bolder, calmer, and less aggressive began to edge closer to the fire. They realized that humans were excellent at killing large game, but terrible at seeing in the dark. Humans realized that wolves possessed an unmatched sense of smell, incredible stamina, and a fierce instinct to protect their pack. So they made a silent pact. The wolves became the alarm system, sleeping at the edges of the human camp, growling at the approach of cave lions or rival tribes. During the hunt, they tracked the prey, running it to exhaustion so the humans could finish it with their spears. Slowly, beautifully, the wolf changed. Its ears softened, its tail began to wag, its eyes learned to track human gestures. The wolf became the dog. I want you to think about the dog sleeping at the foot of your bed, or the one you passed on the street today. That bond, that pure, unconditional love you feel for a dog, was forged tens of thousands of years ago in the bitter cold of the Stone Age. Archaeological sites have revealed graves where humans were buried with their arms wrapped around their dogs, their eternal companions laid to rest with the exact same reverence and grief as any human family member. We did not just domesticate the wolf domesticated us. They taught us a new kind of empathy, a love that extended beyond our own species. And as this empathy grew, so did the human desire to express identity and emotion. They were no longer just surviving. They were feeling, and they needed a way to show the world who they were. Enter red ochre. Long before the invention of written words, humans found a naturally occurring iron oxide clay that, when crushed and mixed with animal fat or saliva, produced a vibrant, blood-red paint. This was humanity's first pigment. Imagine a hunter sitting by the river, dipping his fingers into a shell filled with this rich crimson paste. He drags his fingers across his chest, down his arms, across his face, painting intricate geometric patterns on his own skin. This body paint was not just for camouflage. It was a language. It told the story of who he was, what tribe he belonged to, and what spirits he honored. It protected his skin from the biting wind and the glaring sun. But more importantly, it elevated his physical form into a living piece of art. When a group of hunters painted in bright red ochre stood together on a ridge, they were making a statement to the universe. We are here. We matter. We are not just animals scavenging for survival. We are the conscious, dreaming mind of the earth. Let that thought settle deep into your muscles. The same creative, brilliant blood that invented agriculture, befriended the wolf, and painted the skin is flowing through your veins right now. You are part of an incredible, unbroken chain of survivors. Let your breath synchronize with the slow, steady rhythm of that ancient, beating heart. And let yourself drift closer to a deep, restorative sleep. As you lie there drifting deeper into relaxation, I want you to imagine a map of the ancient world. But do not picture it as a series of isolated, lonely dots scattered across a frozen wasteland. Instead, imagine it glowing with thin, interconnected lines of golden light, weaving across valleys, stretching over jagged mountain ranges, and crossing vast, sun-baked plains. These lines are the veins of the ancient world. They are the first trade routes of humanity. We often assume that Stone Age people lived their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born, terrified of the unknown beyond the horizon. But nothing could be further from the truth. Our ancestors were relentless explorers, and they were the first true global citizens. Consider the journey of a single extraordinary material, obsidian. Obsidian is a natural volcanic glass, forged in the superheated heart of the earth, and cooled so rapidly that it forms no crystalline structure. Because of this, when obsidian breaks, it fractures along edges that can be just a single molecule thick. To this day, a properly knapped obsidian blade is significantly sharper than the highest-grade steel surgical scalpel used in modern operating rooms. In the Stone Age, finding a deposit of obsidian was like finding a diamond mine. But here is the incredible part. Archaeologists have found obsidian blades at campsites hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away from the nearest volcanic source. How did it get there? Imagine a piece of raw black glass gleaming in the sunlight of Anatolia. A craftsman carefully wraps it in a soft leather pouch. He begins to walk. He crosses rivers that have no names, navigates through dense primeval forests, and scales mountain passes choked with snow. He meets another tribe sitting by their fire, and they do not fight. Instead, they trade. He exchanges the obsidian for a beautifully carved bone flute, or perhaps a heavy winter pelt. The obsidian changes hands, moving further and further across the continent, an ancient relay race of trust and commerce. This means that tens of thousands of years ago, a human being could hold a tool in their hand that contained the labor, the travel, and the goodwill of a dozen strangers from lands they would never see. It wasn't just practical items that moved along these ancient highways. They traded for beauty. On the frigid coasts of the Baltic Sea, violent storms would wash up chunks of amber, fossilized tree resin that glowed with a warm, trapped golden light. Stone Age people were captivated by it. They would spend hours meticulously polishing the amber with sand and water, drilling tiny holes through it to string it into necklaces. These amber beads have been found deep in the heart of Europe, far from any ocean. People were willing to travel immense distances, risking starvation and predators, just to possess something beautiful. They traded shells, exotic bird feathers, and rare pigments. It proves that the human soul has always craved aesthetics connection and the wonder of things from beyond their own small world. But perhaps the most profound evidence of the human heart in the Stone Age is found not in what they traded, but in how they said goodbye. When we look at the very early days of humanity, the dead were often left behind. But as the millennia passed, something beautiful and heartbreaking evolved: the concept of grief. Imagine a small community standing at the edge of a freshly dug pit in the earth. The wind is quiet. The fire has burned down to embers. Inside the pit lies a child, lost too soon to the harshness of the Ice Age. The parents do not simply walk away. They carefully arrange the child's body into a sleeping position, as if they are just resting for the night. Then they do something that separates humans from every other creature on Earth. They sprinkle the child with that bright red ochre, covering the body in the color of lifeblood and dawn. They take off their own precious amber beads, the ones they traded for the ones they walked hundreds of miles to acquire, and they place them gently around the child's neck. They lay a perfectly crafted bone needle and a small, pristine flint blade beside small hands. Why would they bury incredibly valuable, life-saving tools in the dirt where they could never be used again? Because they believed in something greater. They believed that this child was going somewhere else, and they wanted them to have everything they needed for the journey. These ancient burials are monuments to love. They show us that Stone Age people wept, they mourned, and they hoped. They understood the crushing weight of loss, and they created rituals to make sense of the universe. When you feel overwhelmed by the isolation of the modern world, remember those ancient trade routes and those carefully tended graves. You are part of a species that has always reached out in the darkness to find connection. We have always shared our tools, our art, and our grief. You are never truly alone. Let the golden warmth of that ancient amber fill your mind. Let the quiet reverence of those ancient ceremonies bring a deep, profound peace to your racing heart, and allow yourself to sink further into the heavy, comforting embrace of sleep.
Okay, wait, I have to interrupt. I'm completely relaxed, and the part about the burials was actually beautiful. But I'm struggling to wrap my head around this. If they loved each other that much, and they had these incredible tools and trade networks, what happened when someone got seriously hurt? You can't just trade an obsidian blade for a cure to a crushed skull or a terrible disease. If there were no doctors, no medicine, and no hospitals, wasn't a severe injury just an automatic death sentence? Didn't they just have to abandon people who couldn't keep up?
That is exactly what historians used to think. The assumption was that in a brutal, nomadic society, the injured and the weak were simply left behind to die. But the archaeological record tells a story of empathy and medical genius that is absolutely staggering. Prepare yourself Because what I am about to tell you is going to challenge everything you think you know about ancient medicine. We have found Stone Age skulls, many of them with deliberate, perfectly circular holes cut right through the bone. This practice is called trepanation. It is brain surgery, and it was happening tens of thousands of years before the invention of written language.
Brain surgery? Are you serious? With stone tools and no anesthesia? Just the thought of that makes my skin crawl. How could anyone possibly survive someone scraping a hole in their head with a rock? That sounds like torture, not medicine.
It sounds terrifying, I know. But here is the most miraculous part. The bone tells the story. When bone is cut, the edges are sharp. But if a person survives and continues to live, the bone begins to heal, growing smooth and rounded around the edges of the hole. The vast majority of these trepanned skulls show extensive long-term healing. These people didn't just survive the surgery. They lived for years, sometimes decades afterward. Imagine the scenario. A hunter is struck in the head by a falling rock or the swinging horn of a bison. His skull is fractured, pressing down on his brain. He is unconscious, seizing, dying. The healers of the tribe know that they must relieve the pressure. With incredibly steady hands, using a razor-sharp obsidian or flint blade, the ancient surgeon meticulously scrapes away the shattered bone, layer by agonizing layer, being incredibly careful not to pierce the delicate membrane of the brain itself. They likely used herbal concoctions to numb the pain or put the patient into a deep trance. But the surgery is only half the miracle. The real miracle is the recovery. A person recovering from brain surgery cannot hunt. They cannot forage. They cannot defend themselves. For weeks, perhaps months, that injured person had to be fed, bathed, protected, and carried by the rest of the tribe. The survival of these patients is the ultimate proof that human beings are defined by our compassion. We do not abandon our weak. We heal them. That is the true mark of civilization. And it was born in the Stone Age. But our ancestors did not just conquer the fragile landscape of the human body. They conquered the most terrifying, unpredictable wilderness on the planet. I want you to shift your imagination away from the snowy tundras and the dark caves. Picture a brilliant, sunlit coastline. You can smell the salt in the air, feel the damp, cool sea breeze on your face, and hear the rhythmic, hypnotic crashing of ocean waves against a rocky shore. For a long time, we thought Stone Age people were entirely land-bound, chasing mammoths across the ice. But massive piles of discarded oyster clam and mussel shells, called shell middens, found along ancient coasts, tell us that they were master foragers of the sea. The ocean provided a bounty that never migrated and never froze. They carved intricate hooks out of bone, tied them to woven lines, and pulled massive fish from the depths. They wove traps out of reeds to catch crabs and lobsters. This seafood diet, incredibly rich in omega fatty acids, fueled the explosive growth and complexity of the human brain. But they weren't content just standing on the shore, looking out at the endless blue horizon. They wanted to know what was on the other side. Using nothing but fire and stone adzes, they took massive, towering tree trunks and hollowed them out, creating the world's first dugout canoes. Imagine the sheer unimaginable courage it took to push a carved log into the crashing surf, armed with nothing but wooden paddles, and paddle out into the open, endless ocean. They had no compasses, no maps, no coast guard to rescue them if a storm hit. They navigated by reading the stars, the patterns of the waves, and the flight of seabirds. over 40,000 years ago. Humans climbed into these vessels and crossed stretches of open ocean so vast they couldn't see land for days. They navigated the treacherous currents of the Pacific to discover and populate Australia. They hugged the icy, terrifying coastlines of the Bering Land Bridge to become the first people to set foot in the Americas. They were the masters of the ocean. So as you listen to the steady, comforting rhythm of your own breathing, let it synchronize with the gentle, rhythmic crashing of those ancient waves. Picture a small wooden canoe gliding smoothly over a calm, moonlit sea. The water is a deep, soothing indigo, reflecting a sky blanketed in a billion bright stars. The people in the boat are not afraid. They are at peace, floating on the vast, gentle pulse of the earth, heading toward a new dawn. Let that same gentle tide carry your thoughts away. Let the water wash over your anxieties, pulling them out to sea, leaving you light, weightless, and perfectly ready to sleep. The ocean is vast and calming, but our journey must now take us back to the land, to a world locked in the deepest, most unforgiving freeze of the Ice Age. I want you to pull the blankets a little tighter around yourself, and imagine stepping out onto an endless, sweeping tundra. The ground is locked in permafrost, covered in a blinding expanse of white snow that glows under the light of a massive, silvery moon. The air is so cold, it feels brittle, snapping your lungs awake with every breath. But as you stand there, you realize you are not alone in this vast sea of snow. Out there, moving silently through the freezing mist, are the phantoms of the Pleistocene. These were not just animals, they were titans. They were walking mountains of muscle, fur, and ivory that ruled the landscape with absolute terrifying authority. To be a human being in this world was to live every single day in the shadow of giants. Imagine the ground beneath your feet beginning to tremble. A low, rhythmic thudding reverberates through the ice, growing louder and closer. Emerging from the whiteout is a herd of woolly mammoths. These creatures were the undisputed kings of the tundra, standing up to 13 feet tall at the shoulder, wrapped in thick, shaggy coats of dark hair, with massive, curved tusks that could sweep away a dozen men in a single motion. Walking alongside them in this prehistoric ecosystem were the woolly rhinoceroses, armored tanks of the ancient world, sporting a massive, lethal horn on their snout. And towering above the brush were the giant deer, often called the Irish elk, carrying antlers so incredibly wide, spanning up to 12 feet, that they looked like they were carrying the branches of a whole oak tree on their heads. But the most terrifying of all was the cave lion. Larger and far more muscular than any African lion today, these apex predators possessed no mane, allowing them to blend perfectly into the snowy, rocky outcrops stalking our ancestors with absolute, silent precision. How did a frail, naked ape survive in a world populated by monsters? How did they not just curl up in the snow and surrender to the sheer, overwhelming terror of it all? The answer lies in the human capacity for strategy cooperation and unparalleled bravery. When it came time to hunt a mammoth, it was not a chaotic, desperate scramble. It was a highly orchestrated, incredibly dangerous military operation. A hunting party would track a herd for days, reading the subtle signs in the snow, waiting for the perfect moment. They wouldn't attack a healthy adult in the open. That would be suicide. Instead, they used the environment to their advantage. They would coordinate a drive using loud shouts, rhythmic drumming on trees, and blazing torches to panic the herd, specifically targeting a younger or weaker animal, funneling it toward a natural trap, a steep ravine, a hidden bog, or a deep snowbank, where its massive weight became its own worst enemy. Once the mammoth was trapped and struggling, the hunters would close in. They didn't have guns. They had to get agonizingly, dangerously close. They hurled their fire-hardened, obsidian-tipped spears with devastating accuracy, aiming for the vital organs. The sheer adrenaline of that moment, the thunderous roaring of the beast, the freezing air burning in their lungs. It was the ultimate test of human endurance. And when the giant finally fell, the entire tribe would descend to honor the kill. Every single piece of that mammoth was a lifeline. The meat meant survival for months. The thick hides became tents and blankets. The enormous bones were used to build the very frames of their winter shelters. They literally turned the monsters that terrified them into the homes that kept them safe. They faced the ultimate fear, and they conquered it. But the psychological toll of living among such terrifying creatures was heavy. You don't just hunt a mammoth or run from a cave lion and then casually go to sleep. The adrenaline, the awe, and the lingering terror stayed with them, pulsing in their veins. They needed a way to process the magnitude of the world outside. They needed a way to tame the phantoms. And so they invented magic. Not the magic of spells or wands, but the magic of representation. They retreated deep into the belly of the earth, into the darkest, quietest limestone caves, where the roar of the wind couldn't reach them. By the flickering, intimate glow of animal fat lamps, they ground their red ochre and black charcoal, mixing it with saliva and water. With absolute reverence, they placed their hands on the cold stone walls and began to paint. They didn't just doodle. They captured the very soul of the animals. They painted the galloping hooves of the wild horses, the lowered aggressive horns of the bison, and the silent, stalking grace of the cave lions. They painted the mammoth, rendering its massive bulk and curving tusks with a level of anatomical accuracy and artistic genius that still leaves modern art critics breathless. By trapping the image of the beast on the cave wall, they were taking control of it. They were sealing their fears into the stone. When you look at cave art, you are not just looking at a picture. You are looking at a prehistoric therapy session. You are looking at a human being taking the chaos and terror of the outside world and organizing it, making it beautiful, making it something they could understand and conquer. I want you to think about the fears that keep you awake at night. The looming deadlines, the financial pressures, the social anxieties. They are your mammoths. They are your cave lions, prowling in the dark corners of your mind. But you possess the exact same psychological architecture as the people who painted the caves. You have the power to take your fears, examine them, and reduce them to something manageable. You can trap them on the walls of your mind and realize that they are just shadows. The monsters are not in the room with you. You are in your sanctuary. You are in your safe, warm cave. The fire is lit. The entrance is guarded, and the cold cannot touch you. Let the giant phantoms of your daily life fade into the snowy mist. Watch them walk away, their heavy footsteps growing softer and softer, until there is nothing left but the deep, undisturbed silence of the winter night. You are safe. You are in control. Let the heavy, peaceful stillness of the ice wash over you and pull you down into a deep, dreamless sleep. As the long centuries passed and the glaciers reached their maximum, creeping down over the northern hemisphere like a relentless, crushing sheet of diamond and frost, humanity faced an ultimatum. The world was actively trying to freeze them out of existence. The temperature dropped so low that exposed skin would suffer frostbite in a matter of minutes. Draping a loose, untailored animal hide over your shoulders was no longer enough. The wind would find the gaps, the ice would creep in, and the cold would steal the heat directly from your core. To survive the extreme Arctic environment, humans had to invent a technology so profound, yet so humble, that we completely take it for granted today. They had to invent the fitted garment. They had to invent the needle. I want you to visualize the incredible patience required for this task. A woman sits cross-legged on a bed of furs inside a shelter constructed of mammoth ribs. Outside, the blizzard is a deafening roar, but inside, she is completely focused. She holds a small, dense piece of reindeer bone. Using a sharp flint burin, she painstakingly carves the bone, shaving it down, thinning it out until it is no wider than a matchstick. Then comes the most difficult part. With an incredibly fine, microchipped stone awl, she begins to drill a hole at the very top of the sliver of bone. One wrong move, 1 ounce of extra pressure, and the fragile bone will snap, ruining hours of work. But her hands are steady. She rotates the stone drill back and forth, until it pierces through. She has created the eye of the needle. This tiny, seemingly insignificant sliver of bone was a weapon of mass survival. With it, our ancestors could tightly stitch together multiple hides using thin threads of dried animal sinew. They could craft parkas with fitted hoods to protect their faces. They created leggings, waterproof boots from sealskin, and thick gloves to protect their fingers. For the very first time, a human being could create a microclimate around their own body, carrying their warmth with them wherever they went. The needle did not just keep them warm, it gave them the ultimate freedom. It allowed them to leave the shelter of the caves and march directly into the teeth of the storm. They became the undisputed masters of the ice. Clothed in stitched furs, they migrated across the frozen steppes, crossed the Bering Land Bridge, and spread across the entire globe. This relentless drive to move, to explore, to walk across continents is etched into the very soil of our planet. When we think of prehistoric fossils, we usually think of skulls and bones, static and lifeless. But occasionally the Earth preserves something far more intimate, something that reaches across the millennia and grabs us right by the heart. In a remote corner of the world, preserved in what was once soft volcanic mud, archaeologists uncovered a trail of fossilized footprints. These are not the tracks of a dinosaur or a mammoth. They are the bare footprints of a human family walking together over 10,000 years ago. Let your mind drift to that moment. The rain has just stopped, and the earth is soft and pliable. A family is on the move. You can see the deep, heavy impressions of the adults, their toes splayed slightly to grip the slippery mud, the weight of their steps indicating that they were carrying heavy loads, perhaps supplies, perhaps the meat of a recent hunt. Their path is straight, determined, driven by the absolute necessity of survival. But right beside those heavy-burdened adult tracks, there is another set of footprints. They are small. They are the footprints of a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. And when you look at the child's footprints, you see a completely different story. The child's tracks do not walk in a straight line. They dart to the left, running toward a puddle. They splash through the mud. They circle back around the adults. There are places where the small feet slip, where you can see the frantic sliding marks of toes trying to catch their balance. And then the steadying footprint of the adult who reached out to catch them. There are marks where the child stopped entirely, perhaps to pick up a shiny rock or look at a strange insect before running to catch up with their parents again. Those small, chaotic, playful footprints are a revelation. They shatter the illusion that the Stone Age was nothing but a grim, joyless march for survival. In the middle of an untamed wilderness, surrounded by predators and harsh elements, that child felt safe enough to play. They laughed in the mud. They drove their parents crazy by running off the path. They were loved, protected, and allowed to be a child. The adults carried the heavy burdens, so the child could skip. That is the essence of humanity. Across tens of thousands of years, the love of a parent and the innocent joy of a child have not changed one single bit. As you lie in your bed, I want you to feel the profound comfort of that unbroken chain. The same fierce, protective love that guided that ancient family through the mud is the same love that built the world you live in today. You are the product of thousands of generations of people who fought, survived, and carried the heavy loads so that you could eventually have a safe place to rest. You don't have to carry the heavy burdens tonight. You can put them down. The long march is over. You are in your safe haven. Let your mind trace those playful, skipping footprints in the mud, winding slower and slower until they finally come to a gentle stop. Feel your breathing align with the slow, steady rhythm of that ancient family settling down for the night. The world is quiet. The mud has hardened into stone, preserving their memory. And it is time for you to close your eyes and join them in rest. The deep freeze of the Ice Age could not last forever. Slowly, imperceptibly, the great glaciers that had covered the northern world began to retreat, weeping massive rivers of meltwater that carved new valleys and filled the oceans. The global temperature rose, and the harsh, unforgiving tundras transformed into lush, rolling green hills and dense, vibrant forests. The world was waking up, and humanity was waking up with it. We had survived the ultimate test, and now we were ready to do more than just endure. We were ready to build. But the way we began to build civilizations challenges everything we ever thought we knew about human history. For centuries, historians believed in a very strict timeline. First, humans discovered how to farm. Farming gave them a surplus of food, which allowed them to stop wandering and settle down into villages. Once they had villages and free time, they developed religion, and then finally they built temples. It was a neat, logical progression. But then, deep in the sun-baked hills of modern-day Turkey, an archaeological discovery shattered that timeline into a million pieces. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It is a massive, sprawling complex of monumental stone circles, and it was built over 11,000 years ago. It is older than Stonehenge. It is older than the Great Pyramids. Most importantly, it is older than agriculture. I want you to truly grasp the impossibility of this. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. They did not have domesticated wheat. They did not have beasts of burden to pull heavy loads. They did not have metal tools or the wheel. Yet armed with nothing but flint limestone and an unimaginable force of will, they carved massive T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons. They quarried these stones from the bedrock, dragged them for hundreds of yards using only ropes and human muscle, and erected them in perfect, deliberate circles. They didn't stop there. They spent thousands of hours carving intricate, hauntingly beautiful reliefs into the pillars. Images of scorpions, foxes, lions, and vultures standing out in three-dimensional perfection. Why would nomadic hunters dedicate so much back-breaking labor to build something they didn't even live in? Because Göbekli Tepe was not a city. It was a sanctuary. It was a temple. This discovery flipped history on its head. It wasn't agriculture that forced humans to settle down and invent religion. It was religion. It was imagination. It was the deep, burning desire to connect with the divine that caused humans to gather in such massive numbers. And because they gathered to build and worship, they had to figure out how to feed everyone, which eventually led to the invention of farming. Our ancestors were not driven purely by their stomachs. They were driven by their souls. They looked at the stars. They felt the presence of something greater than themselves, and they decided to carve their devotion into the very bones of the earth. And from that spark of imagination, the dawn of the modern world rapidly broke over the horizon. Not far from Göbekli Tepe, in the fertile valleys of the Near East, the first true permanent settlements began to rise. Let your mind travel to the ancient settlement of Jericho. Here, over 9,000 years ago, humans stopped moving entirely. They mixed clay, water, and straw, baking it in the scorching sun to create mud bricks, building the first permanent homes. They coated their floors with smooth, gleaming lime plaster, and to protect the community they had built, they constructed a massive, towering stone wall around the entire village. It was the first physical boundary line drawn by humanity. Inside that wall, they felt secure. They felt a sense of permanence. With this newfound stability came the final, beautiful blossoming of Stone Age technology pottery. They took the soft, pliable clay from the riverbanks, shaped it with their hands into perfectly symmetrical bowls and massive storage jars, and subjected it to the intense, purifying heat of the fire. The soft earth transformed into hard, waterproof ceramic. They decorated these vessels with intricate painted patterns, turning everyday items into masterpieces. They could now store grain for years, boil water, and cook hearty stews. The constant daily panic of starvation was finally completely eliminated. The village was born, and with it, the foundation for every city, every nation, and every civilization that followed. As our journey through the Stone Age comes to a close, I want you to realize that this era did not simply disappear. It evolved. The stone tools were eventually replaced by bronze and iron, the mud bricks by steel and glass, the bone flutes by grand orchestras. But the bloodline remains completely unbroken. The hands that pull the blanket up to your chin tonight are the exact same hands that knapped the flint, painted the caves, and dragged the monolithic stones of Göbekli Tepe. The mind that is slowly drifting toward sleep right now is the same brilliant, resilient mind that tamed the fire and befriended the wolf. You are not disconnected from this grand, epic story. You are the current chapter. Every struggle, every triumph, and every sacrifice of the Stone Age was made so that you could lie here tonight, in total safety, in total comfort. You have inherited their strength. You have inherited their peace. As the fire of the ancient hearth slowly burns down to glowing red embers, let the warmth radiate through your chest. Feel the solid plastered floor of the ancient village supporting you, grounding you, holding you perfectly safe. The walls are built. The night is conquered. The phantoms are gone. Let the quiet, endless whisper of human history lull you into a deep, heavy, restorative slumber. You are home. You are safe. Close your eyes and sleep.